Yeah. So I just said paper, but actually it's a larger project, which will most definitely consist of multiple papers. And our overarching research question is, what factors influence the expression of uncertainty in political speech? And what we're trying to get at here is figuring out if expressions of uncertainty in politics reflect real-world events or merely political or personality factors. And we're looking at the US congressional records matched with speaker demographics and the time frame. Oh, I'm sorry, it turns out I scrolled. And the time frame is 30 years from 1994 to 2024. However, due to some technical issues, we now look at 5 years because my computer was having a breakdown. And right now I'm going to present some preliminary results, and most of the presentation will be about the research proposal. So to get started on the preliminary results, this is looking per week at the relative word count of uncertainty, uncertain, and uncertainties, just those 3 words, relative to the total world word count of congressional speeches that week. And actually the results are much more telling than I expected, in the sense that we see quite significant events such as different COVID waves, the Trump-Biden election reflected, and where we see spikes in the use of the word uncertainty. This is also where we see significant jumps compared to the week before. On average, there were about 13 references to uncertainty per week, so not that many because we are just looking for one word and its direct variance right now. So to give some example of sentences that are included, some sentences that were shown in the previous graph look at, include just the word uncertainty. So for example, the full effects, like this is someone talking about the effects of COVID on education, and he specifically uses the word uncertainty. But as we all know, uncertainty in language is not always reflected by the word uncertainty. So here's another quote where a politician says, "We simply do not know enough to take decisive action." And here it's also an expression of uncertainty, but is not captured by the measure we previously showed. So you might wonder, why did we choose that measure? And it's because this is the measure of the World Uncertainty Index, which is a highly cited index that looks at the economists' intelligence reports. And even though it's very highly cited, it's extremely simple. And all they do is search for the word uncertainty in these intelligence reports per month. And so we wanted to first see, okay, is there some relationship here? And there's not. There's a very low coefficient, and the p-value is 0.7. So what we will do later is do a time series analysis and see if maybe there's a lag. But for now, even though we do see spikes where you would expect, there's not a direct matchup in political speech and the intelligence reports, which could be that there's some sort of lag relationship, but it could also be that these are very different situations where maybe uncertainty is just discussed in different ways. So with the World Uncertainty Index, these are looking at intelligence reports, which might focus more on defense, whereas congressional speeches might focus more on things like elections and the future of the political system. And why is this all important? Well, there's many prescriptive approaches to uncertainty communication in politics. How should politicians communicate during crises? What is the best way? We also have experiments showing that depending on how politicians and government representatives communicate, citizens respond differently. So for example, with COVID, when people were informed about uncertainty surrounding vaccine side effects before later learning about negative side effects, this buffered the loss in trust in the government. It also buffered the loss in vaccination intention. So we see serious effects of uncertainty, and yet we have no descriptive measures in political science. And that's what this project aims to do. So now we'll get more into the methods in the larger project plan. So we look at 30 years of the US congressional record, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. The reason for this is that this is a particularly deliberative environment. And also previous studies have shown that congressional members' speeches reflect similar trends to the US president's communication, for example, so that it's not a super like specific case. And why the House of Representatives and the Senate, that's because they have different election cycles. So if we're looking at the relationship between predictive factors and real world events, them having different election cycles tells us a lot. And for data collection, the speeches were scraped, which took a very, very long time and is part of my computer's breakdown. And luckily, though, there was an existing parser that I was able to use, which turned this into semi-structured textual data, which included IDs for each speaker next to their speeches. And based on those IDs, I was able to match each row with the relevant biographical information of that speaker. What did I match? Personal characteristics as well as political ones. So at the time of the speech, what was their party? Were they the majority or minority? What was their age at the time? How many years have they served in Congress, etc. And I also removed all speech that was not about a political topic. So I can go into that more if people have questions, but I removed administrative speech, for example. For those not familiar with text analysis, this is kind of what the data set looks like. So the total data set when exploded by sentences is 22 million rows, which is a lot. And so for now, I'm focusing on 5 years, which is roughly 2 million rows. This is the distinct values. So there's some sentences that repeat that are very simple. And there's 729 different speakers. This is different from this number because people's names change, for example, when they get married. And then there's all the personal information in the other columns. And so earlier I was saying the simplest approach would be to look for just the word uncertainty, but that's not the whole story. It's more than just one word. So what we're going to be doing is basically first building up a dictionary for uncertainty cues. So there's some existing uncertainty dictionaries that say they're developed for cross-domain application. However, none of these domains that they focus on are politics, notably, but more so scientific articles, Wikipedia, news articles. We take these dictionary lists and expand on them with word embeddings such as global vectors, which have been shown to perform well with congressional records specifically, and LLMs. The idea of this is that you explode the dictionary to all the words you could have never thought of yourself, and then you narrow it down based on what is relevant for the particular case. So for instance, a word like should, we delete because in a scientific article, should suggests uncertainty. Why should affect X? Okay, they don't know. But when a politician says should, they're usually urging some action. It could in some cases mean uncertainty, but usually it's going to have a very different purpose. We also are going to attempt to assign conceptual weighting, where, for example, words like uncertainty have a high score, where words like appears, which might sometimes cue uncertainty, but sometimes not, have a lower score. We don't expect this to work fantastically, but the idea is that it's as fine-grained as possible so that we can make it coarser later if we need, and that it just allows us to capture as much as possible. And we'll apply this to the data set per sentence. These are some words that are included, but there's going to be a lot more, and we haven't fully developed and validated it yet. So we will manually go through all sentences to calculate the F1 score, so the amount of false positives and false negatives, using a great app called Annotinder, where you literally swipe right if it matches a label and swipe left if it doesn't. And based on the performance of this, we can iteratively add to and remove words from the dictionary based on what performs well and what doesn't. And thanks to this manual validation process, we'll have many sentences, both the ones the dictionary has flagged, but also the ones it hasn't, that we then have hand labeled as being uncertain or not. And based on that, assuming that we might not have the best F1 score ever from the dictionary, although it would be great if we do, we can also test the performance of other methods such as a BERT model or an LLM to see if they perform better for classification than a dictionary alone. Why do the dictionary then? It's because it really speeds up the hand annotation process, and we have a lot of data that we're working through. So to round off, the next steps are to finally do, after we've detected where there's uncertainty in sentences, to do an analysis of the variables I mentioned before. All of these were chosen because previous political communication research has shown them to have some effect on communication trends. So therefore, we have general expectations about them, but nothing that really constitutes a hypothesis. For example, with gender, we know that female politicians use more hedging language than male politicians, which is like making sentences a bit less direct. So maybe they also express more uncertain language, but maybe not. So it's not really a hypothesis, but we have some general expectations about these different variables. And we'll apply a mixed effects model. So we have this issue of the distribution being very weird with the current measure because most sentences do not contain the word uncertainty. We'll have to see how our final measure is. Maybe we'll have like rankings of uncertainty. That's also something that we have to play around with a little bit. But it's likely that we'll have a lot of sentences that are zero. There's no uncertainty. So we'll have to normalize the distribution, and we'll be grouping by month and speaker. Why not week? That's because many speakers or legislators do not speak in a specific week. So month allows us to capture more. And we consider all variables to be time variant, meaning that someone's party could change over time, as can their district. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and looking forward to everyone's feedback.
Thanks, Ella, for the presentation. We would now open up the Q&A session, and I think we would have time until 3:30, right? For the next. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. I have a couple of questions.
Yeah.
First, correct me if I'm mistaken, but the congressional record pertains to floor speeches, yes? Or things of the like?
Yes, yep.
Okay. So we might observe then that there's an important phonetic and phonological component of how people might produce these kinds of utterances, right?
Yeah.
So we might very easily imagine somebody who sarcastically says, no, of course we don't know this. And it would seem very difficult for me, or seems very difficult to me that we might be able to readily extract that just from the syntactical features that we have in front of us. And I just wonder, my first question was, do you have any kind of principle in extracting and distinguishing between those types of utterances?
Yeah, so the answer is quite simple, because we're not going to aim to distinguish, because the idea with that is that you can never say what the intention behind the utterance was. And so we're not trying to find sarcasm or joking. We're just looking at uncertainty language, which could be used for any purpose. It could also be, and that's why we also look at the factors, that they actually are very short, and they're using uncertainty as kind of a weird way to, like in some accusations, for example, some of the accusations against Trump for various things, congressional members will often kind of jokingly be like, well, I'm not sure, but correct me if I'm wrong. And they'll purposely actually play up the uncertainty to kind of be polite about what is actually a very direct and certain accusation. So that stuff we'll look into later. And the idea is that this helps us flag instances that we can then approach for further analysis.
So I've got to say, I've mentioned before, I haven't social linguistics. And one of the things that's been abundantly clear in my time doing this is that the strategies that people employ for expressing these sorts of things have to be very discourse specific. And so one might wonder right out of the gate whether or not the dictionary you have is even appropriate for the task. Since the ways that in which scientists might express uncertainty are clearly marked differently than music and other sorts of speech. The choice and patterning of their modal verbs notwithstanding. So I was wondering, from the measures that were offered, how are you going to try and account for this?
Yep. No, for sure. The idea is that the dictionary is a starting point, and with filtering out words that we remove the obvious cases, but there's also going to be many that we don't catch. And that's the benefit of hand coding the sentences, that let's say the dictionary in the end has a pretty low F1 score. It doesn't perform great, but now we have thousands of hand coded sentences. We can see if, and these sentences which are hand coded will have been done by people who know that these are political speeches and who are myself, my supervisor, and the research assistant. So people who are very familiar with the project's goals. And then with those hand-coded sentences that are tailored to the context, you can see if they perform much better than this dictionary, which is very likely the case because of what you said. Yeah.
I think Bert,
Yeah, thanks, Ella. Maybe I missed it, but what is your definition of uncertainty?
Oh, it is the lack of deterministic knowledge. I think it's in, yeah. So determinism meaning if you have the same inputs, you get the same outputs. So yeah, that you basically know what will happen, what has happened, what is happening.
So, okay.
And it's tricky because there's a big range of that, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering, have you considered moving beyond the words being used by the politicians? Because you just said in response to Joyce, like, no, it's really difficult, but could pauses between the words,
Yeah.
tone, like what I'm doing now, a bit uncertain. Are that the ways to get? Are you considering that?
Not in this project, but I think that would be great future research. But right now we're looking at how, like what lexical cues in political speech suggest uncertainty. So not looking at tone or expression or all the other ways that uncertainty can be expressed. But I do think, I mean, if, for example, we see really interesting trends with the lexical cues, like hopefully there will be further research that also looks at these other things. But right now it's just really specifically like the way people like the words they choose when they talk.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the presentation. I think there's mainly 2 points. The first one is related to how to maybe create this dictionary and the measurement. I was wondering whether you know the work by Christian Rau, where they look into emergency emphasis in speeches, and I could imagine that this is somehow related. I'm not sure what exactly they do, but I think they have a dictionary. No, I'm not sure whether it's a classifier, but I think it's a dictionary, and maybe you can use some seed words from there.
Yeah.
And then the second one's more related to what you can actually do with the measure in the end. I was wondering, are you looking in variation across policy areas? Because I think it would be interesting to see whether uncertainty like occurs in policy areas where it actually makes sense. For example, like health issues in the COVID times, or whether it's just occurring in some weird settings and in weird contexts where you will not expect it from the beginning. So maybe it's like chance to disentangle whether it's a communication strategy or whether it's just like politicians actually not knowing.
Yeah, so that's a definite next step. And for example, you can see that like in one significant jump, I didn't label it at the beginning there because I looked at the sentences from that week and they just didn't have anything to do with each other. It was just random mentions of uncertainty.
Lots of sarcasm.
Even though like there were some uncertain events happening at that point, but I mean, you could say there always are. So yeah, eventually I think it'll be important to, for example, look at like health specifically or migration and see also how that differs. Also to connect it with these events because of course this is only 5 years, so it's manageable, but over 30 years, it's going to be, it'll help to really know what topics were driving the peaks. So that's,
First, thank you so much. It's a really interesting project. And I was wondering, this is just speculation, but I was just curious what you think about how politicians or parties might kind of utilize uncertainty to their advantage, or if you have any inclinations about kind of further implications of what uncertainty might do.
Yep. So, I mean, the first, I guess, most obvious answer would be that it's actually reflecting what's going on. It's truly them deliberating on what they do and do not know, which, like, looking at the spikes and also just looking through these sentences was actually often the case, at least for the word uncertainty. So they could use it more to be informative, but also, for example, the example I mentioned earlier about how I noticed uncertainty in accusations, it could be used to kind of soften, like a blow, basically, that it's actually when someone is really certain and is being really direct, but they don't, like, as a politician, they need to be diplomatic, they need to almost pretend to be diplomatic, and therefore they can put it in those situations and say, like, well, I'm not sure, but if you look at this graph, that sure looks like, an upward trend to me.
Right.
So it can also actually be used as a way to joke about certainty. So yeah, those are things that we'll have to disambiguate later, but yeah, right now I think first we're
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
And then Kai's question.
Yeah, I have a couple of suggestions. I think first of all, in terms of the explanatory variables, I think you want to distinguish between sanity checks and explanatory variables. And I think the issue suggestion that Jasmine had before is a good one, probably gender too, because we have some sort of benchmark there. And so you would separate them from your actual analysis because they're just there to check the validity. If it turns out that gender doesn't have an effect, maybe we just are picking up on sarcasm a lot. Then I think, can you go back to the thing you just had? Timeline. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at your y-axis, and I think what you want to do is think about a benchmark. I'm just thinking, is there a lot of uncertainty or not? I mean, there is variation, but 0.1%, right? That's very little. And so maybe in order to show the importance of this, maybe you want to benchmark it with another similar concept that maybe other people have measured and others were confidence, for example. Maybe that would be a meaningful benchmark. It's hard to see what this means also. I mean, maybe you can ask ChatGPT, can you write me a speech about this and this with 5 uncertain words in it? What sort of, and then read that speech. Would that feel like a very uncertain speech? Just trying to think of ways where you could validate your measure to make sure it has a bit more meaning. Because it might be that there's just an increase in uncertainty, but they also use lots of these other words. It's actually not so much uncertainty. Change that characterizes these speeches best. And then regarding what I find fascinating is this line with this other line with the World Uncertainty Index. Right?
And this is standardized, by the way. So this is
No, I already saw this a few days ago. So.
Sneak preview.
But it's a uncertainty index applied to the United States.
Oh yeah, sorry. So the intelligence reports are per country. So this is just their intelligence report on the US. So that's a really good point. This is just the so there's an overall world uncertainty index, but actually this is just their use of the USA reports.
And I think this is really fascinating, and it would be interesting again as a sanity check to further cut up this world uncertainty, the USA world uncertainty index. because basically this shows no responsiveness, also not negative responsiveness. I mean, I can also imagine, okay, the economy is tanking and the leaders are like, oh, just calm down, we have it, don't worry. And so then you would expect a negative correlation here, but it's zero. It's really zero. And so I wonder, it's like, are there perhaps particular domains where this correlation is higher or lower? I think that, I mean, that type of information, it's pretty basic, but it's already super interesting. And I think you can just descriptively do a lot with them. I mean, if you can show that uncertainty in the economic domain, there's no response. That's a bit strange, right?
No, really good point. And especially with, for example, a topic like defense, like I wonder, if there'd be more of a link. Because it could also just be like, that they discuss different topics in general. No.
But thinking about the uncertainty index itself, isn't it a bit strange that there is no peak in March 2020? I mean, that's the pandemic, right? So it actually dramatically declines there.
I see what you mean.
February.
It could be. I think I also need to dive more into these intelligence reports, because I really wonder if they have this bias towards national security. And if, for example, like that's why something like COVID, which was so uncertain to everyone else, for intelligence purposes was like, no one's going to do anything now. But that's a really good point. It is weird.
I think this general discussion on the validity of the World Uncertainty Index is already very interesting. This is actually something that lots of companies use.
And it's weird. It's literally, I was also really surprised by that. It's just the keyword search. No, true. And also maybe good to mention the World Uncertainty Index. Also, it predicts stock market volatility. It predicts GDP growth. So it's really been found to have that you can predict quite a few things just from the frequency of uncertainty. Thanks.
We have 2 more minutes, and I see, do you have a short question?
Yeah, it's a two-finger. So the World Uncertainty Index,
We don't have to think.
I just wanted to follow up. So looking at this, then maybe, so when are things discussed in Congress? Are they, when do they enter the agenda? Maybe there's also a lag between like the uncertainty stage of the country at the country level, right? And when politicians actually discuss that, because on the right-hand side of the graph, it looks to me that there is some correlation.
It's really like an up and down.
Right? And there might simply be a lag, like on the left side of the graph. All right, I buy that there's no correlation, but what happens if you, for example, lag the variable? Maybe things just don't make it to the agenda and they just talk about it later. Right? So that might also be something.
For sure. And that's something I'm excited to do when we can look at all years, because then we can really hopefully find something there.
So this is why this wasn't too funny.
Okay, I think we're out of time now, so we can move to Nikki's presentation. Thank you so much, Ella.
Great. All right, guys. We'll get started with Nikki's presentation. So Nikki is a PhD candidate here at the UvA, and she's going to present her next dissertation paper.
Yes, thank you, Delaney. Thank you all for being here. Today I'm going to tell you something about the paper I'm currently writing, which is about diverging paths. Oh, why is it on there?
You can just minimize, I think, or move it down.
It's not doing anything. Oh, wait.
No, you can.
Okay, that works. Okay. Diverging Paths, exploring polarization on sociocultural issues among youth. So I wanted to start with some, oh, they're not showing. Oh, well. I wanted to start with some headlines from some news articles and research papers on the gender gap in political attitudes. I'm currently focusing on the gender gap in youth and the gender gap is something that has been researched a lot in the political realm of academia. However, something that caught the attention of the media and also academia was in January 2024, so about a year ago, the Financial Times headlined that a new global gender divide was emerging. And this was interesting. It was an interesting article because it got a lot of attention, and it actually claimed that young men were more conservative or are more conservative than young women. And what was interesting about this? Well, they combined data from various countries and they basically pulled it all together, while you couldn't actually compare these data. And they came to this very interesting conclusion that young men are significantly more conservative. Well, that's when we thought, okay, could this be true? Could it actually be the case? According to other researchers, it was not replicable. But the interesting thing is that they only focused on 18 plus. So while this article claimed, okay, this is about young men, young women, I mean, the concept of young is obviously something that you can discuss about. But some were also talking about Gen Z. And Gen Z is partly the age group that is currently in their 12 to 18 year olds. And that's, let's see, that's something that the researchers were missing. So we came to the conclusion that we wanted to know more about the 12 to 18-year-olds. And we wanted to see what is going on right here, because this is a critical gap. Why does this gap matter? Well, when you talk about adolescence, and roughly adolescence is about 12 to 25-year-olds, but adolescence is actually a key period for identity development, for development of core values, development of attitudes, and as you can hear, a very important phase according to developmental psychologists. And that's when you add this to the knowledge that for this age group, social media is extremely important. And with the current trends that we see going on social media, such as the thread-life trend and also the manosphere, we thought it would be really interesting to see what is happening amongst this age group of Gen Z. So the question that we asked ourselves was, has the gender gap already emerged in 12 to 18-year-olds? Why already? Because we know that there is a gender gap among adults. We know that this is the case. This has been researched a lot. But we actually do not know anything about 12 to 18-year-olds. So we gathered the data. What did we do? We first did a pilot study. We wanted to develop a measuring instrument for polarization among 12 to 18-year-olds. Polarization in this age group is something different than for adults. For example, the topics that are important for this age group is something else compared to adults. So we included both general and youth-specific topics. How do we come to these topics? I did a focus group with students, with teachers, and we discussed what topics do we really need to include, what topics are important amongst these adolescents. And we came up with 14 issues in total. And we piloted this questionnaire among the students of one secondary school, and we ended up with almost 400 completely filled out questionnaires. So this was actually a pretty good pilot study. And this already generated some really interesting data that I'm going to show you later. We also already did the full data collection last fall, and we collected data on multiple secondary schools in the Netherlands, also to compare different areas. And in that data set, we have over 1,800 completely filled out questionnaires. So I'm also excited to work on that data set, obviously. But now I'm focusing on the pilot data only. What did we do to map the attitudes of youth and also get some insights into polarization? We had 3 sorts of questions or 3 sorts of items for each topic. This for each topic that you see in the lists, we had a statement, and these statements were either extremely progressive or extremely conservative. We mixed this up throughout the questionnaire. And this is the statement that we used for the gender norms. And it says men are better suited to be leaders than women. And the students had to indicate, do I agree with this or do I not agree with this? And additionally, we also had an effective polarization item in this pilot study. And it said, a friend has a different opinion than you on the statement repeated. However, this was very skewed. The data was really skewed. It was skewed towards the I don't mind side. And this either means the item doesn't work or that this age group is not polarized or effectively polarized. And so we're still thinking I'm still thinking about how we could measure effective polarization amongst this age group. But for the full data collection, we took out this effective item and we fully focused on opinion polarization. And next, we also included an issue importance item asking or stating, I have a strong opinion on the statement. And that's because we hypothesized that those who think the issue is more important are more extreme in their attitudes. I haven't tested this yet, but we'll see. So what's the deal with Gen Z? You can't see it completely, but it's okay. First, one of the most important findings is that we find statistically significant differences on 11 out of 14 topics. And how do we do this? We did independent samples t-test, very simple. However, this test assumes normality, and that's obviously not the case. So we did some other tests as well. We did the Bayesian t-test, the Wilcoxon-Rank-Sum test, and the proportions tests. And still, almost all of these issues were significant. Only, I think for the proportions test, 1 was excluded. So we had 10 out of 14 sociocultural issues that showed significant differences between boys and girls. And probably even more important, on all these topics, boys were more conservative than girls. And the biggest differences we observed in the gender-related issues. This figure might be familiar. I also used this one last year in the Stuk Rood Vlees article, and it shows, I think it's a bit hard for you to see, but it basically shows that the mean score difference between boys and girls. So the mean score of the girls is subtracted from the mean score of the boys. And whenever it's above the 0 line, it means that boys are more conservative. The 3 biggest differences are gender and sexual diversity, gender beliefs, and gender norms. And the ones that do not show any significant difference is online gossip accounts, voting age, and smartphone policy in the classroom. However, even though it's very interesting and we do see that there are mean differences between boys and girls, and doesn't tell the complete story because we do not know everything about the attitude distribution within the groups. So that's the next step we took. What did we do? We used the remote function. What does the remote function do? It identifies the number of modes in distribution. So there's a lot of discussion about how you can identify polarization, like the methods to use to say this distribution is polarized. However, some form to identify polarization is to look at the number of modes in a distribution. So that's what we did. And However, this remote function does not say anything about whether, for example, boys are more polarized than girls. So that's why we also did a Levine test on variance to determine whether this statistically significantly differs. And what we see is that in 9 cases, boys and girls have a different number of modes. In 5 cases, boys are more polarized, and in 4 cases, girls are more polarized. I'm now going to show you some of the figures for the 3 biggest gender gaps, so the gender-related issues. So what does it look like? This is a first figure. The lighter colored bars are the modes that were identified with the remote function. And as you can see, this is for the gender norms. So the statement, men are more suited to be leaders than women. For girls, there is clearly one mode. Girls do not agree at all, which I'm very happy about. However, there's still some work to do amongst the boys. Because they actually, while on average they're on the right side of the distribution, there are still 2 modes. So boys in this case are more polarized on this issue than girls. And we can also see this in the variance and in the number of modes. However, we also have some less straightforward cases. Let's see. Yeah, for example, the gender beliefs statement, which said whether you are a boy or a girl is determined at birth. Boys overall agree. There's only 1 mode identified. And for girls, there's 2 modes. There's way more variance amongst the girls than amongst the boys. However, the difference is not too big, actually, and it's not that significant. So I would say the method is not like watertight. And I'm still thinking about a way to, better be able to distinguish whether girls or boys are more polarized. Because right now I feel like we're a few steps further than simply eyeballing, but it's complex. And even more interesting is the third one, in my opinion. This is about gender and sexual diversity, and the statement was all schools should celebrate Purple Friday. Purple Friday is the celebration amongst Dutch secondary schools for gender and sexual diversity. And you see girls have 1 mode on the neutral option, actually, and boys have 2 modes, 1 completely at the left and 1 on the neutral option. And then it's interesting to ask yourself, okay, if you have a mode on the neutral option and a mode on the right, would you still say this is polarization? Or how would this, for example, differ compared to a mode on 1 and mode on 5? So I'm still trying to wrap my head around these figures and the gender gaps and the combination with these gender gaps combined with the polarization figures and trying to make a story out of it. But if you have any feedback or thoughts about the analyses and the figures, they're very much welcome. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. We now open for the Q&A and
Thanks. Super interesting topic, and really looked like a rich data that you have there. So it's really nice. I have a couple of questions. I'll give to 1 for now. About would you mind if your friend had a different opinion item?
Yeah.
You said that there was an intense skew to the left.
Yeah.
Just from looking at the first item.
No, it's Q to the right.
Oh, sorry.
Right. There's a V on the left. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yes, of course. But basically, people not caring, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Would it help if you split up the groups based on the previous item? Because arguably, and maybe even interacted with gender, because arguably this is more impactful for women or for girls than for boys, right? The gender split could maybe at least somewhat show different distributions between the two groups.
Yeah.
And whether you disagreed or agreed with the previous item
Mhm.
might make you care more or less if your friend disagrees or not, right?
Yeah.
So if you agree, then maybe if you think, well, actually, yeah, men are better suited leaders than women. Your friend disagreeing wouldn't be as negatively impactful for you if it would be if it was the other way around. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean. I'm also thinking about different ways to phrase it, or maybe because it obviously it differs if you, for example, extremely agree and you say that someone has the complete opposite opinion from you.
Yeah.
And this also includes the students that answered neutral.
Yeah.
So even though that weren't a lot in this case, but yeah, and I'm also thinking about simply different contexts that we could use for the effective item. Maybe not a friend, maybe someone else, or maybe not, maybe having a conversation with someone. I don't know. I still have to brainstorm more about this.
Yes, in general, it's an interesting, or maybe just a scatter plot on it, on two dimensions, each being an item.
Yeah.
Would be just interesting to.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Oh wait, you're doing it.
Yeah, we then have 4 questions already. First from Gijs, then from Salwa, and another question, then from Yolanda, and then we'll continue with the rest.
Then behind you as well.
Okay.
Here we go.
All right, very rich data set, I agree. Starting with this, I know this question you just discussed, I don't think you can call it effective polarization because the measurement is so different. Yet I do think it's a very interesting thing to pursue. And I was actually reading the question thinking more about some sort of simpler version to measure tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is in the direction, is in the to whom the disagreement is directed.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Polarization is about disliking groups, not
Yeah.
disliking your friends. That I think is an important distinction. In any case, I would be curious how this measurement would line up with the sort of more standardized effective polarization questions.
Yeah.
Regarding your question about all schools should celebrate.
Yeah.
I think the problem there is that it's not a two-dimensional question, it's a tri-dimensional question, because if you're really tolerant, you also accept that religious schools don't do this. And so therefore you end up.
Yeah, but do you think that this age group is considering that?
Well, there are lots of religious schools in the Netherlands. I mean,
Yeah.
two-thirds of schools are actually religious schools.
Yeah, but there are also a lot of religious schools that do celebrate Purple Friday.
Yeah, okay. So this is the more extreme version. I don't know if they think about it, but just judging the issue, I don't think this is a bidimensional statement that steps clearly onto one progressive and one conservative.
I agree, but we used very simple statements because it needs to be understandable also for 12-year-olds. And I agree that some statements are very extreme in a sense that they might need some nuance.
Yeah.
But I feel like we cannot give more nuance because it will be more difficult for these children actually to give answers to the statements.
True. So I'm not suggesting you change the question, but in terms of interpreting it,
right?
You have problems interpreting it, and the problem is that it has 3 sides instead of 2 sides.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
Same. I really like the diversity of graphs that you've also shown here, and I actually have only 2 very quick clarifications.
Mm-hmm.
One is, did you ever run these questions through adults? And maybe you can't do that because it refers to schools. But I was wondering if adults would answer in a different way. And the second is, what is progressive and conservative in the vaping?
I asked ChatGPT. For some statements, it's questionable whether it's progressive or conservative. But in this case, conservative is that vaping should be forbidden for those under 18.
Oh. Because boys are really into vaping, I guess.
No, girls.
What? Really?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But on your first question, not all questions can be answered for adults or by adults, but a colleague of mine actually asked some of these statements or presented some of these statements to the parents of students, and we see he let the questionnaire fill out by parents and by the children, and there's a very big correlation between parents and children's attitudes. So seems like for these items, parents are answering the same.
Yeah, so when it comes to the gender norms questions, I'm wondering whether the differences you see, whether they would also rise in more, if you use more unprompted questions. Because if you present, especially 12-year-olds, with the statement, men are better leader than women, they will be prompted. And I mean, this is a problem for survey research in general, and it's a problem for respondents in general, but I could imagine, and this is not my field of research, but I could imagine that this is especially a problem for 12-year-olds.
Yeah,
so,
I haven't looked into that yet.
I mean, of course, it's also an empirical question, but I was wondering whether you could also collect data, like more open questions data, where you ask, basically use survey measurements to measure, instead of gender norms, maybe measure gender stereotypes. So there's this literature, for example, political science, that basically prompts respondents to give me 5 words of what group X is, what describes group X typically. Yeah. For example, you could also do that with in your survey, and I think that would be also easier for kids to fill in.
Yeah, you think so?
I think it would be less prone to prompting, definitely, than the statement.
But even though the gender norm statement was prompting, the girls all disagreed.
Sure, but that could also be prompting.
Because you could also ask it the other way around.
Exactly, I thought about that.
And then you might find the same mode among the girls, right? So I think it also links a little bit to the interpretation of your results that Price was talking about. So what are you actually capturing with that? Yeah. Because you might not be capturing, the gender difference that you are actually thinking that you're capturing, but just like, if you phrase the question, girls are better leaders than boys, then the boys will say, no way, right? And then you have the same modes.
Yeah, you will have the same, or I expect to see the same modes.
So what does it tell you then about, the patterns that you're finding? Maybe that is actually a polarization that you are finding, and now we are saying, well, the boys have one mode, the girls are,
it was the other way around.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
But still, the questions differed, or the statements differed in whether they were very progressively or very, very conservatively formulated, and we consistently see that boys are more conservative.
Yeah, but that then brings us to your definition of what is progressive. So is then the polarization the other way around a good thing, or do you want to arrive at when we think, okay, they are both good leaders, right? That's
yeah, that's personal.
Yeah, no, it's how you specify your concept of progressiveness.
Yeah, it will always be a discussion, I think.
I remember reading the question. Then your question when we and then we see everything.
No, but it's more
Okay, then let's just save the question for Nikki Dekker. And then thank you again for the presentation. And also thanks for the sponsors. ERC, NWO, and UBA.